Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to put on our behavioral profiler hats and fundamentally deconstruct the hidden psychological forces that drive human competition. We're digging way beneath the surface of our everyday interactions, mapping the journey from the microscopic world of petty office politics all the way up to massive, multi-billion-dollar market disruptions. Listen, we aren't just going to describe human behavior today, we're going to completely tear it apart to reveal the deepest, sometimes darkest, psychological truths about why we actually compete the way we do. Okay, let's jump right into a psychological mystery. Think back to a time when a really close friend or coworker succeeded at something big, and you felt this involuntary, ugly little sting of envy. You know the feeling, right? You smiled, you congratulated them, but internally, man, something just hurt. So what is really happening beneath the surface here? Well, most of us brush that off as a minor character flaw, maybe a momentary lapse in kindness. But as behavioral scientists, we know better. That feeling? It isn't a flaw at all. It is a completely unconscious, ancient survival mechanism firing off in your brain, desperately warning you of a shift in your social standing. To get to the bottom of this, we really have to start at the evolutionary root. Way back in 1954, the psychologist Leon Festinger pinpointed a relentless biological imperative to constantly assess our status and climb the hierarchy. He called this the unidirectional drive upward. See, in our ancestral past, your specific rank in the tribe dictated your access to food, to mates, to literal survival. And guess what? That exact same evolutionary hardware is humming along right now in your modern boardroom. We are biologically driven to minimize the performance gap between ourselves and our peers, because to our primal brains, falling behind doesn't just mean losing, it means literal physical danger. Now, this drive manifests in the modern workplace in a form we all know too well, the frenemy. Here's what people actually see. Someone who smiles at you in the break room, asks how your weekend was, and seemingly offers all the support in the world. But what is actually happening? It's a covert power struggle. Beneath that friendly, ingratiating exterior, a frenemy fundamentally views your entire relationship as a zero-sum game. Their personal sense of success doesn't actually come from their own advancement. It's derived from the comparative advantage they gain when you fail. And this perfectly captures how these individuals operate in the shadows. A frenemy is never going to attack you directly. No way. That would expose their malice and threaten their own social standing. Instead, they weaponize plausible deniability. They'll devalue your big win by casually mentioning you just got lucky. Or they'll hit you with some really hurtful humor and hide behind the classic excuse of, hey, I was just joking. They might even orchestrate these deliberate false mistakes, like, oh, conveniently forgetting to CC you on a hypercritical email. They engineer your failure while keeping their own hands completely clean. It's honestly a masterful, unconscious manipulation of power dynamics. When you look at the underlying science of social comparison, the research proves something kind of unsettling. We are hardwired to continuously measure our abilities against everyone around us to define our own self-worth. You literally cannot opt out of this cognitive bias. Every single interaction, every project, every casual meeting, your brain is subconsciously evaluating it as a metric of your status. We basically use the people closest to us as human yardsticks for our own value. But here's the real question. Why does a close friend's success feel like a physical threat, while a total stranger's success might not bother you even a little bit? To crack that, we have to look at psychologist Abraham Tesser's self-evaluation maintenance, or SEM model, and the actual architecture of the human ego. This framework reveals exactly how we aggressively regulate our self-esteem when we're suddenly faced with the highly threatening reality of someone else outperforming us. This brings us to a really fascinating psychological paradox, the paradox of relevance. Check this out. If your friend succeeds in a field you don't care about, let's say they won a local baking competition, and you're an accountant, you naturally engage in what's called reflection. You get to bask in their reflected glory, and your ego actually gets this nice little warm boost. But if they succeed in your exact domain, say they get the major promotion at your accounting firm, your ego perceives it as a literal, physical attack on your identity. The closer the friend and the more relevant the task, the more severe the identity threat. And when that ego is profoundly threatened, the emotion of envy doesn't just sit there. It mutates into action. It becomes social undermining. This isn't just someone having a bad attitude. This is an unethical, antisocial weapon used to secretly restore the balance of power. It's a calculated, instrumental form of relational aggression. The perpetrator is actively, quietly trying to hinder your ability to succeed, trying to drag your status down so their own fragile ego can finally recover. Let's map out the mechanics of this. I call it the sabotage protocol. It usually kicks off with the direct action, maybe publicly belittling your idea in a meeting. Then it rapidly devolves into passive action. You get the silent treatment, or they deliberately withhold vital project information. But the absolute most terrifying consequence is the spillover effect. When a frenemy's internal moral barriers are shut down by chronic envy, their sabotage isn't just pointed at you anymore. It spills over like a virus, rapidly creating a toxic, highly defensive team culture that rots organizational trust from the inside out. All right, we've essentially autopsied the individual behavior, but now we need to scale this psychological investigation way up. What exactly happens when you combine thousands of fragile human egos into a single entity? Well, you get corporate behavior. And guess what? The exact same dark forces driving your passive-aggressive coworker are driving macro, multinational corporate strategy. Corporations experience intense status anxiety. They obsessively evaluate themselves against peers, and they absolutely engage in covert operations to protect their standing. Enter the ultimate corporate frenemy, the stealth mode startup. Just like an envious coworker hides their real intentions to keep you from defending yourself, a stealth startup operates in total, absolute secrecy. They are quietly building an infrastructure of disruption. By deliberately avoiding the public eye, they prevent established market leaders from crushing them or stealing their intellectual property before they're ready to strike. Make no mistake, this is institutionalized, covert aggression. So, how do you uncover these hidden corporate threats before they completely blindside you? Elite strategists rely on the jobs to be done framework. Now, this requires a massive psychological shift. It demands that we stop looking at what a product physically is and start looking at the unconscious motivations of the consumer. Customers don't just buy products, they literally hire them to make some kind of progress in their lives. By shifting our lens to what the customer is genuinely trying to accomplish, we suddenly expose competitors that were entirely invisible. Which brings us to one of my absolute favorite case studies of all time, the McDonald's milkshake mystery. Researchers diving into this found that early morning commuters weren't actually buying milkshakes because they were comparing them to Burger King milkshakes. No, they were hiring the milkshake because it was super thick, it took a really long time to drink, and it kept their hands busy during a long, agonizingly boring drive. Its real competitors, it wasn't other fast food chains. The real threat was, surprisingly, bananas, donuts, and bagels. The underlying job was simply to make the commute tolerable. The moment you reframe competition around that underlying job, you realize something terrifying. Your greatest threats aren't the competitors you can clearly see plotted on a spreadsheet. They are the invisible workarounds. It might be an indirect substitute or some entirely new experience-based alternative. It could be a weird DIY hack your own customer invented in their garage. It could even be a do-nothing scenario where the customer just decides to postpone taking any action at all. Just like the workplace frenemy, these stealth solutions operate completely off your radar, quietly draining your market share while you aren't looking. And we see these unseen friction points destroy massive, multi-million-dollar corporate plans whenever leaders conveniently forget about human psychology. Take the massive crisis at Fortune Brands. They tried to force hundreds of employees to relocate to a single, unified headquarters outside Chicago. What the executives saw was just a smart, strategic real estate consolidation. But what was actually happening on a psychological level? It was a massive existential threat to the self-evaluation and status of their employees. It triggered a catastrophic loss of talent, completely destroyed morale, shattered internal trust, and it got so bad that their CEO actually quit before the plan was even finished. You simply cannot execute a macro strategy if you ignore the covert psychological forces of the humans involved. So, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought as we wrap up this explainer. We've traced the ancient evolutionary roots of competition, starting from the deep, hidden envy of a close friend all the way up to the secretive, aggressive launch of a market-disrupting startup. The psychological architecture is exactly the same. Whether it is a smiling coworker secretly evaluating your status or a stealth startup quietly targeting your customers' underlying needs, the game is always being played. So I have to ask you, are you truly prepared to recognize the invisible knives in the dark?